Hey now guys, it's Knockout21. How are y'all doing today? In this video, I'm going to be talking about a really tough game. Um, this game I recently beat. As a kid, I wasn't able to do it, but I guess with maturity comes forethought or so on and so forth. And the game I'm talking about now is Desert Strike. I'm not only going to be talking about the Genesis version, I'm also going to be talking about the Super Nintendo version. From what I understand, these things are a couple of months apart. This one was released in June of '92, and this one was released in October of the same year. And the Super Nintendo one is a little bit more refined from what I understand. However, it was somewhat censored. I'll be discussing about it in the video, but basically it's just a review of the same game on both machines. Each are going to get their own scores, and yeah, onward to the video. Desert Strike is one of those games that was really hard to beat back in the day. It utilized something that we now call tank controls. Anyone that's played any of the earlier Resident Evil games would know what I'm talking about. Combine that with various objectives and difficult enemy units, and you'll be in for one of the toughest games back in the 90s. But like every other game back in the day, with a little practice and memorization, even a game like this could be beaten. Now the main thing that is unique about Desert Strike back in the day was how to proceed beating the level. This was not the case of getting from point A to point B while destroying everything in between. Rather, you were given a set number of objectives to complete before finishing the level. These encompass anything from destroying vital enemy structures to rescuing hostages or escorting personnel from the battlefield. Having objectives to complete on a large map is pretty cool, or was pretty cool back in the day. However, my main issue is not being able to complete the objectives in any order you want. Okay, let me rephrase that. You are able to tackle these objectives in any order you want, or if you proceed to do an objective ahead of another, the enemies near that set objective will be much more difficult to defeat. Their armor and attacks will go up, forcing you to waste vital ammo on them. So completing them in order is the best course of action for success. And part of that success is keeping an eye on your supplies. As mentioned before, ammo is limited. So you can't simply go crazy with guns blazing. You have to be careful with what you shoot and who you're shooting at. Though if you see that you are low on ammo, you could just find the nearest ammo crate to restock, so it doesn't feel like it's too limiting. But keep in mind though that these crates aren't infinite. The main issue I have with this game would be fuel. That's right, fuel. Unlike most games where you could keep going on and on without worrying about what's in your tank, Desert Strike basically requires you to monitor your gas. This presents a problem during play. You'll be in the middle of an important objective, only for an alarm to sound off, notifying you that your chopper is low on fuel. Which is probably stupid considering that an Apache attack helicopter could remain in the air for around 3 hours, and that's far longer than it takes to complete one level. Regardless, there are some fuel drums around the map you could use to refuel your tank, but this adds another level of planning when approaching your objectives. And talking about approaching your objectives, picking your co-pilot can definitely affect how simple or hard your mission could be. Each co-pilot, though, affects different aspects of the Apache, such as lift speed and weapon accuracy, though some also have negative effects as well, such as X-Man having low accuracy or Tracker more likely hitting a friendly. You really have to think who to take with you when playing a level. But all honestly, I gotta stick with my homeboy Lieutenant Carlos Valdez. This guy can hit enemies way outside their range, making him essential for later stages of the game. You can easily find him in level 1 in the most northern corner near a fallen fighter jet. Okay, one problem many of you might find is how to locate certain things on the map. Now, this all takes place in a desert. There are no markers or landmarks or anything of that kind to know where you're at. You will continually have to pause the game a lot to see where your objectives are at, where ammo crates are at, where fuel is at, and get a sense of basically where you're at. It's one thing that kind of takes you out of the game a little bit. I wish, now this is probably too much asking for 16-bit consoles, but I wish there was some sort of mini map or some arrow system to point you to the right direction. However, considering the time and the era, I don't think that we're able to do that, not without slowing the game down. Controlling the copter with the default settings does take some time to get used to, and like I stated before, this game utilizes the tank style controls to navigate the Apache around the map. Essentially, pressing up and down makes your vehicle go forward and back, pressing left and right will make it turn left and right, and holding A on the Genesis or R on the Super Nintendo will enable it to strafe, which is quite useful while dodging enemy fire while attacking. This is especially easier on the SNES control pad since holding R with your index finger frees up your thumbs to press whatever you need necessary at the time. You can't do that as easily on the Genesis controller. By holding A, you'll be sacrificing your ability to use your missiles, plus reaching over to push another button with one of your other fingers is pretty uncomfortable. And if the default settings isn't your cup of tea, you can always change how the chopper moves in the options. Besides momentum, which would be the most realistic choice, you also have from cockpit, which is more or less the same thing as the momentum, though the weighty feel of the Apache is gone, allowing you to stop on a dime. The from above option, the chopper will basically move in whatever direction you press. These two control styles make the game much easier, especially for those who aren't used to tank control, although I do have to point out that it looks pretty weird watching the helicopter move this way. It's kind of like someone scrolling across the screen with a mouse or something. Though this makes dodging extremely easy. In terms of music, well, I can't really say much. There are about 4 tracks: the intro, the title screen, the briefing, and the ending. Those tracks are good for what they are, however, I was expecting a little bit more. During gameplay, all you hear is the whine of the propellers. It is somewhat immersive, however, it gets boring really, really quickly. Though if you were to ask me which version has the better music, I gotta give it to SNES. The tunes sound much cleaner, and it's easier on the ears. Sound effects is a bit of a mixed bag. The sound of gunfire really feel like they have an impact on the Genesis version, though they were somewhat muffled on the SNES. However, the certain shots coming from the AA guns that are only available on the Super Nintendo. So, in my mind, I gotta give it personally to the SNES on the sound effect department. The graphics on this game are pretty good. All the vehicles and buildings and the actual Apache are drawn with nice detail, though many of the smaller assets on the ground are hard to determine. Things like enemy soldiers and MIAs are only a couple of pixels high, and they're very easy to miss. Color is pretty bland. This is a desert after all, and all the stages you see is just a variation of brown. Except for the final stage where for some reason the ground is purple, though this is most likely trying to simulate like nighttime or something. Graphics on both consoles are the same, And it looks like Visual Concepts, the guys who handle the SNES port, just copied the assets from the Genesis version. So from what I can see, graphically they're about the same, but this is not a good thing for the Nintendo's 16-bit console. They just basically copied the Genesis version pixel by pixel. By doing so, everything looks kind of wide, as if they stretched out everything just to fit the screen. It makes things look somewhat bizarre, though I have to point out that there is a weird border around the gameplay on the Genesis version. However, I don't think that was an issue back in the day, since TVs back then would just crop out the outer edges of whatever was on the screen. This game sets everything up admirably. It starts off with the intro describing the actions of the madman who invades a neighboring country for their oil and basically starts committing crimes against humanity. This more or less mirrors the actions of Saddam Hussein in the real-life Desert Storm back in 1991, and they use live actors to portray the villains, giving this game a sense of realism. Plus, you get a sense of what the general is thinking in scenes after beating every level. The briefing room before each mission does give you a sense of urgency by providing you your next objectives, so the presentation of this game is pretty good. However, I do have to point out that some things on the SNES version, there are some things on the SNES version. Some scenes have been censored, and this is a major gripe that I have about games in general. It kind of cheapens the experience for me. The most notable scene that they censored is in the opening when they dip someone into a vat of acid. And there you have it, guys. Desert Strike for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. This game is awesome. I gotta give it probably a B, but there's gonna be a bit of slight differential between both of them. Each of them get a B, but for different reasons. My main gripe with the game overall is the fact that I have to continually pause, and you have to continually pause to see the status of your ammo and your fuel. I do not like that. I wish it would have some sort of indicator or something on the screen while you're flying around to show you how much ammo and how much fuel you got, maybe in the bottom right hand corner or something. They weren't able to do that. I don't know why. A lot of other games do that, but no, for some reason they didn't do that. And that is one issue I have with the game in general. I think they kind of fixed that in future iterations of the Strike series, but for this first iteration of Desert Strike, I do not like that. Now, what are my issues for each individual one? Well, for the Super Nintendo version, my main issue is the censorship. I do not like the fact that they altered scenes just to appease Nintendo of America's, rules and whatnot. I don't think the scenes that they censored were all that bad. I wish it wouldn't have been done and they would have kept the game, as original as possible. But yeah, that is one issue I have with the Super Nintendo version. Another issue is the slowdown. Now, that's not to say that there's no slowdown on the Genesis version. Yeah, there is slowdown on the Genesis version, but it's much, much worse on the Super Nintendo version. Oh my god. There could be just you and a single enemy on screen, and the game will slow down to a crawl. You'll be bogged down with this issue, especially in later levels in the game. And it just takes you away from the immersion of the game, basically. And you don't see this problem not as bad on the Genesis. On the Genesis, where there's slowdown, it's not too bad. It is still noticeable, but after you're done, then the game kind of just picks right back up. For the Super Nintendo, it kind of lingers a little bit. For the Genesis, controls is a bit of an issue, as I stated before. it gets quite uncomfortable having to try to reach over with your thumb to, like, you know, strafe left and right while shooting at enemies and whatnot. That is one issue. Another issue is some of the sound effects. Believe it or not, the Super Nintendo has like, I think, one or two more sound effects that the Genesis doesn't, especially with the AA gun. For example, on the Super Nintendo, you'll hear an AA gun firing, and that's when you got to get out of the area and find out where this thing's at. On the Genesis, you don't get that. You get hit by the AA gun, and then that's when you realize, oh, I'm being fired at, and by the time you notice, you already have a couple of points knocked off your armor. That is one gripe I have with the Genesis. But besides that, they're both very awesome games. I do recommend them. I believe you could fetch the Genesis version for around, like, I think $5 loose, and for the Super Nintendo version, I think something like a couple of bucks more, maybe like $7 or $8 more for a loose copy. Inbox copies, well, for the Genesis, it's like $20. I think that's how much I paid for it at a local mom and pop store. For the Super Nintendo, I don't know. I've never seen a Desert Strike in box out there in the wild. So if you see one, you could put in the comments down below and say how much it costs, in box and whatnot. Anyway, this was Knockout 21. Thank you for watching my video. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. And like always, have a good one. Take care, you guys.